In the meantime, we will start with a short polling question that we hope you will enjoy taking part in. What drug delivery technologies would you be interested in hearing about? And your choices are spray dry dispersions, hot melt extrusion, modified release oral multiparticulates, modified release osmotic tablets, or inhalation. So if you please take a moment to answer that question. Thank you. We'll just take a moment for the poll to get tabulated there. And you can select more than one. We have 20 more seconds. Okay, thank you very much. So 83% said spray dry dispersions, 67% hot melt extrusion, and 50% tied for the both forms of modified release, both oral multiparticulates and osmotic tablets, and just 17% for inhalation. So do you have any comment on that, Corey?
I guess maybe just one quickly. Yeah, it sounds like there is indeed, in addition to interest in spray dry dispersions, quite a bit in hot melt extrusion, and we do have significant equipment and experience with hot melt extrusion, and it's a great technology, and what we see is that it's applicable to kind of a subset of the formulations, that is the drugs and polymers that one can spray dry. A subset of those where you have a drug that's fairly low melting and thermally stable, and polymers, particularly things like PVP, PVPVA, and Solute Plus, which is a new BASF polymer. We have formulations that are well suited to HME. It really does have some nice manufacturing advantages that make it low cost. So I think the way we see it is one can screen, if you want at small scale, screen dispersion formulations using SDDs, and then later, if it makes sense, transition to HMEs. We certainly manufacture clinical trial materials by HME fairly routinely here as well, and it is a good, nice complementary technology to SDDs.
Thanks, Corey. And we have some questions here. We received a couple of similar questions, so we'll wrap them together. Is HPMCAS the universal polymer for general use?
Well, that's maybe a bit of a strong statement. We certainly use it the most often of the dispersion polymer. So I'll assume the question kind of pertains to use in a dispersion particularly. We use it the most often among the polymers, but it is not always the right answer. So again, the advantages of it are that it is particularly good at providing solid state stability, and then it maintains a high TG at elevated humidity. With respect to performance in the intestine, particularly, it provides both particularly good supersaturation and then maintenance of that supersaturation or preventing crystallization. But it's not always the best with respect to performance. There are, again, cases where, for instance, one might want to use a non-enteric polymer to get more complete dissolution in the stomach, say to get really rapid onset, high in the small intestine. Sometimes there are chemical stability reasons why HPMCAS is an acidic polymer, and so sometimes there are chemical stability reasons why one wouldn't want a dispersion with an acidic polymer, and so for that reason you would choose a neutral polymer. So I wouldn't quite say it's universal, but we do certainly use it the most often, and I would say at the least for one of screening formulations for dispersions, it would be a good one to screen.
Well, related to that is a question, what other polymers have you used or recommend for SDD?
Sure. Yeah, again, we also use hydroxypropyl methylcellulose, so HPMC, which is, of course, kind of the precursor to HPMCAS. So that's a cellulosic neutral non-enteric polymer that we use fairly often. PVPVA, copovidone, is a good one to be used, and that one is particularly, one nice thing about that one is it is particularly well suited to hot melt extrusion. PVP is a typical one. So PVP and the VA are both a little more hydrophilic, particularly PVP is quite hydrophilic. And so sometimes those can be useful if you want a non-enteric, a little more hydrophilic polymer. particularly for the very lipophilic drugs. BASF has a polymer they sell for dispersions, and they intentionally engineered it to be good for hot melt extrusions called Solu Plus. So that's one that we use occasionally. Oidrogits, the Oidrogits series, acrylate-based polymers, also can be useful, and there are enteric and non-enteric and actually reverse enteric versions of Oidrogit that we will occasionally use. So all of those are kind of in the arsenal, and then of course one can combine surfactants such as pluronic, tween, SOS, etc. You can go to a 3-component system where you combine surfactants as well.
Okay, thank you very much. That is, we have one more question that we're going to cover today, and that is, what is the regulatory status of HPMCAS as regards to pharmaceutical applications?
Yeah, it's approved for use in the U.S. and we worked Pfizer. It's made by Shinetsu in Japan, and we worked for quite some time with Pfizer on dispersions with HPMCAS. And Pfizer actually prepared a safety package and got the polymer approved for use in the U.S. And we do have access to a Type 5 DMF file that describes the doses at which it's been used in animals and humans. And so there's a very extensive safety package for it. And as well, it is approved for use in humans in the U.S., Japan, and Europe.
Thanks. By the way, participants, if your question was not answered, you will be receiving a direct reply after the webinar. So thank you so much. It's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And if you missed part of the presentation, don't worry. You can visit www.excellience.com where you can download any of our archived scientific seminars. If you want to share this presentation with your colleagues, simply note their name and email address in the post-webinar survey, and we will send them a link to the archived presentation. Please join me in thanking our speaker for today, Dr. Corey Bloom, who is Director of Formulation Science at Bend Research. And if you enjoyed today's presentation, we encourage you to register for a complimentary webinar from Bend Research on September 29th, as you can see on your screen, from 11 a.m. to noon Eastern Time, spray-dried dispersions, robust formulations, and science of scale from preclinical to launch. To register, you can email phoenix.ivers@bendresearch.com for more information. You will notice that a post-event survey will pop up on your screen at the end of today's seminar. Please fill out this survey because we would really appreciate your feedback as well as your suggestions for future webinar topics. Thank you all for your time. We hope you found